it is. This is Angela Nirvana, your hostess with the mostest on the Friends of ADOS TV channel, bringing you those ADOS hot topics, making the case for reparations, making the case for the COVID-19 stimulus relief. I am so excited about today's show. You know, I marvel at the way God works. When I was talking with Mr. Daud GeAzan about the topic for today, I didn't know that it perfectly aligned with Mother's Day, right? Like, how incredible is that? That a show about our blessings in the form of children was birthed the day before Mother's Day. Only God could do that, family. It's powerful to see God at work in everything we do in our very lives, the way our bodies are animated, the way we don't have to turn on a switch to breathe, to have the blood course through our veins. God is just ever present within you. Happy Mother's Day, family. I love you so, Black. I love you so strong. Yes, I do. Thank you, Lisa, for joining the live. Lisa Todd, uh, Mr. Daud GeAzan's co-host at the Articles of ADOS podcast. Thank you for being on the live, my sister. Yeah, so we're going to get into today's topic shortly. I'm just waiting for you guys to have an opportunity to file on in, start your watch parties. You know how we do it. And while we do that, I just want to give you a little tiny Mother's Day poem just to let you know that I see you, family. I see you, mothers. Oh, I'm a mother myself. I love being a mother. I tell you, when my daughter was born, I saw the face of God in expression when she came through me. Nothing but a miracle. So this says, my mother, my jewel. A mother is a jewel to treasure. I'm going to try not to cry, y'all. Y'all know I'm a crybaby, right? A mother is a jewel to treasure. Her love and kindness know no measure. She can turn a frown into a smile. She helps you go that extra mile. I won't believe there is another to give the love that comes from mother. Amen. Hey, happy Mother's Day to my mother, to my grandmother, to my sister friends, to my ADOS family. Happy Mother's Day. I don't care about the COVID right now. I want you to celebrate what you've done, to be the channel in which we are still going and growing in this country. I think 36 million strong. Be proud of that. Hold your head up, sisters. It's been a rough ride, and it's gotten even rougher, but guess what? We are the original mothers of the earth, right? So we're built for this. Hey, we're doing it. I see you mastering this. I see it in your beautiful children that my daughter goes to school with. I see them. They're fabulous. They're wonderful. They're excelling in leaps and bounds, family. There is nothing too great for our children. But in order to ensure they have a future, it's time for everyone to pick up a brick. This movement has to go nationwide, family. We need all 36 million. Yes, at least half of y'all. Okay, Dawood says maybe about 5%. But we doing this. My nights are sleepless and restless, as are many of the mothers of the ADOS movement and the ones who just love us for having kids. Not everybody is a mother that's fighting this fight. So I thank you for picking up bricks and tuning in today's show to understand the vast importance of our activism and advocacy right now. Our lives depend on it. and especially the future of our children, because our children are our future. And without further ado, let me bring up my guest, the fabulous, the incomparable Mr. Daud GeAzan. Daud, you're on the main platform with me now. Thank you so much, family. Just out of respect for Mr. GeAzan, he chooses not to come on camera, and we respect his wishes. Thank you, Mr. GeAzan, once again. you have just you have just been bringing so much fire to every show over here at the Friends of ADOS TV as of late. We just love you so much. We thank you so much for your researched evidence of what is really going on with the ADOS and our politics, and just being the wind beneath our wings to get us fired up to get out here and get engaged for not just the sake of us, but for especially our children, which I know are very near and dear to your heart. Thank you for being on the
Yes.
line.
Thank you, ma'am, and peace and blessings to everyone. I really appreciate this opportunity to share this discussion with you and everyone, and I hope that it really carries and is sent around the ADOS world, because this is an avenue, an approach to understanding how we can better nurture our children in this hostile environment.
Yes. And
I would,
hostile it is.
yes, and I would like to begin by praising the Holy Mother, um, beginning there, because it's from there that everything began, literally. And this is
Yes.
information that's been known since the 70s, and we know it periodically through African celebrations and that sort of thing. But it's more critical than a periodic thing. The Holy Mother is the foundation of the Holy Trinity. It was a part of the original Trinity before it was corrupted. Now, this is where you get people clashing with cognitive dissonance in their minds because of how we've been orientated in this society. But the original Trinity consisted of the Father God, Holy Mother Goddess, and Holy Child. Now, here's the basis of this. And it's going to make so much sense. Like when we talk about things and it makes so much sense. So it's not so much what I'm saying, it's just the fact that the facts make sense. Well, this is going to make so much sense, it's going to blow your mind. Okay, the Holy Mother. The first time that humanity began to speak a language, we just take it for granted. It did not come from some man just all of a sudden deciding there's periodic discussions that need to be going on and languages need to be learned. It came about because the mother, at some point in human history, in early history, began to speak consistently language that consisted of clicking sounds, which we're taught to make fun of and we believe is primitive. Well, it's from those clicking sounds and other consonant and vowel sounds that the woman was speaking to her child. This created and strengthened a bond in the child, where the child became more connected to the mother. It's this sacred bond and bonding of the woman and child in humanity's early stages that fosters later protection of the Holy Mother, of the mother, and also fosters what later became known as family. That's why the father protecting the mother and the mother being the nurturer that allowed for a family to exist. Once families began to cooperate with each other to protect themselves from environments, whether that be aggressive animals, or even other aggressive humans that never created such bonds with their mothers. That's what it comes down to: bonding with the mother and then bonding with the father. in that order. And it's again, they were wise enough to realize you don't just value one over the other, man or versus woman. They both have their necessary impacts for the development of the child. So one is nurture, one is protection and survival in the environment, where that was the role of the male. So for nurturing, what came out of the nurturing? Well, I've just given you language. The earliest languages, well, all today's languages stem from some African mother about 80 to 90, 100,000 years ago, who began to create consistent linguistic connections with her child. And it caught on to other mothers doing the same. And that fostered what later became language. Every language today stems from 100 or so thousand years ago, and it was an African woman who did it. Probably stood no more than 4 or 5 foot tall. All right. From there, the
Wow.
woman and her holiness is credited. Anthropologists, archaeologists know what I'm about to tell you. It's been printed in the journals. It's just not allowed in conventional wisdom discourse. We have the farming revolution take place. It came about because women began to sow the seed and also began to manipulate herbs, creating what today we call medicine. And they did so by coordinating the growing of such things to benefit the family. This would later grow into and become farming. This is considered one of humanity's revolutionary progressions. Change the world. It's credited to women in the anthropological record, but it's just not discussed openly. More specifically, it can be attributed to a black woman because no other type of humanity on the planet existed at the time. That's also well known. So not only do we have the origins of language, we have the origins of farming. We also have the origin of mathematics. The oldest mathematical tool on the planet is referred to as the Ashango bone. There's another similar instrument that was a few thousand years before it. Well, this dates back about 25,000 years ago. All right. The elements of the Ashango bone is affixed to the moon. Now, what is significant about that? This Ashango bone can also, while affixed to the moon, can also be affixed to a woman's menses. It can be used to plot when a woman's going to have her time.
Mm.
So anthropologists believe that highly intelligent women were the ones that crafted this Ashango bone. So we have the beginnings of mathematics, the beginnings of medicine, the beginnings of farming, the beginnings of language. What do we have here? We have civilization here, people, stemming from the Holy Mother. The only time we've gotten away from the Holy Mother is because of the invasions of the Indo-European and Indo-Aryan into Northeast Africa and northern India, where the Holy Mother was venerated and was considered a part of spiritual development. It's when those hordes came in invading, they altered the Trinity. I'll just keep it to the Trinity. They altered the Trinity, taking out the Holy Mother and inserting in a Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit has particular attributes. Well, those attributes were significantly connected to the Holy Mother. I'll give you one more. In ancient times, we can say what levels of primitive and that we're so modern, and this one is going to sound a bit harsh, but it was a part of their survival. So when a woman reached her time of no longer being able to produce children and have the menses, in times of difficulty, she would offer herself as sacrifice. She would allow herself to be killed and that her body would be chopped up and placed into the ground to help nurture the ground for growing.
And
At
a
some
woman
point,
reached her time of no
at some point, a male sacrifices himself for the same thing. The first time this is dated around 75,000 years ago, when the woman would offer herself as sacrifice so that that their society could survive. At some point, a male does this, and it continued to be literally celebrated and eventually uh, weeded out in human or African practice, where it just became celebrated, and you today know it as the Eucharist. Think about that. So that's how powerful uh, sacred feminine is. That's how powerful the black woman is. Um, and I could do a similar thing for the man as I sort of transition into the holy child who takes the place of sacrifice for the society. This has all kinds of ramifications if you would also think it through. So the Eucharist we know is a Christian tradition. Well, it dates back as the males assume that role to roughly 26,000 BC, and its origins are in the mother, the holy mother in human form, willing to sacrifice herself in times of drought, in times of calamity, for the survival of the society. And that sort of is my lead into what we're going to talk about today. I've done lectures on the Holy Mother before because she is sacred, and we need to bring her back.
To have you back because I definitely need more of that. Oh, we need that lecture over here, right, family? Shout out to Trey Lincoln. What's up, fam? DeAndre Blanchard. What's up? DeAndre says, yes, they remove the woman. That's why homosexuality is so normal to them. That's interesting. Sean Allen Rector, this brother here, he says deep. Shout out to Sean. Sean is, oh my God, you guys are kind of cut from that same love of our Black children cloth. He is the creator of, founder of Boys to Men organization here in Los Angeles to help our youth. Like one of the mentors they've got down here, one of the best advocates and mentors here in Southern California. Sean, if you're able to type in how they can find Boys to Men to donate to your cause, do so in the chat. DeAndre Blanchard says, indeed.
Work. That is sacred work. He's doing sacred work. That's sacred work.
And he is such a powerful brother in his own right. And I mean, I've just seen him, go through a couple of partnerships and still keep rising from the ashes like the phoenix he is. He and his wife, Maggie, have done an extraordinary job with our young men out of some of our distressed schools, where I've been to the ceremonies when they elevate, and I've seen the byproduct of his work with these men going off to be college educated and major contributors to society as a result of his love and his commitment. I mean, he's a father as well, and has reared an incredible son, Noah, who, I'm exceptionally proud of. He is just, he is very reflective and representative of the Black men like yourself, like so many that I know, especially in this movement, that won't be televised in the major networks. They're not going to be talking about you brothers that come together and love your women and love your children. You guys won't make the news at 11, regrettably. But that's why Friends of ADOS TV is a home for you, okay? Anyone is welcome on this show that has something that they want to dialogue about. You can inbox me at Angela Nirvana. This is our show, ADOS Hot Topics. You can inbox me your topic and your talking points, and I'm happy to interview you about what you'd like to discuss on this show. But my show is no respecter of pedigree over here. We're all intelligent beyond measure, and we all have a voice and something to contribute. And I'm happy to share your gifts with my audience. We're richly blessed from each and every one of you. DeAndre says, indeed, DeAndre, we've been lied to and have to re educate ourselves. Okay, Sean Allen Rector has shared his Boys to Men website for you guys to donate your time and your resources. www.thetimefoundation.org. It's in the chat. So with that said, thank you all for being on the live. Thank you for sharing it and creating a watch party. Let make this go viral. This is a very important show. I will be creating many watch parties hereafter. But go ahead, Mr. GeAzan. Let's get into the show's topic for today. I'm going to lead with your very first talking point, if that's okay. You're free to free flow if something else comes up. But one of your talking points, the very first one, is children are born geniuses. Let me repeat. Children are born geniuses. A society and its culture either enriches this, limits this, or destroys this. Let's talk about it.
I'm going to give you a very simple fact that will prove that's the reality in terms of born geniuses. Every human child that learns the language they were born into, it takes a certain level of intellect in order to do that. Most people don't know the level of intellect that's required in order to learn language, because if a child doesn't have it, they just don't learn to speak. So here it goes. The intellectual capacity it takes for any human child to learn language is equivalent to a second year college astrophysics student. That's it. In order to learn language, the child must have the capacity, similar capacity to a second year astrophysics student in order to learn language.
Wow. Wow.
So the mere fact that 90%, let's say it's 90%, could be higher, are not functioning at the astrophysics level, at least by the age range of being a second year college student, is society's fault. And therefore, and people know this. People know what I just said. And so what you do is you take a look and say, well, why aren't at least 90%, let's say 80%, let's say 50% of children making it to adulthood are not functioning at that level? I mean, you got to ask yourself, well, then you realize if people know that all children have that capability, then the challenge is, why aren't they ensuring that in the schools? Because they don't want it and they don't need it. As I was telling you off camera, this society only needs roughly 20 to 25% of people functioning at that level. If more people function at that level, industry couldn't use them because there'd be a glutton of them, and politics couldn't use them because there'd be a glutton of them. What does that mean? That means they must be suppressed. The natural genius in children must be suppressed in this society, because this society would be overwhelmed by them, because they would ask more challenging questions. They would be forced into more activism, which is why they have burdened college capable people with debt, so that they're less likely to speak up and be confrontive of the situation, because they'll be bound by whatever jobs they're able to pick them up, or no jobs that pick them up, to keep a thumb on them. It's strategic. Schools have problems because they're supposed to have problems in this system. They don't need those children. And again, for those children that survive that, those are children that are born with superior spirituality, or I should probably use other terms. We all have spiritual potential. Some have more spiritual potential than others. So the spiritual potential I'm talking about is that the child that does live in a highly egregious society, in a society with very little resources, that somehow excel And we looked at that, we're taught to look at that as individual effort. That's the material. But it's not that. It is spiritual potential effort that's able to exert itself despite the hostile environmental realities. Those are spiritual children that are further being directed to uh, uh, fulfill the dominant society's interests and needs. Because what do we do with those children that excel, that are the exceptions to the rule? Well, they're gobbled up by the military industrial complex, as we see through the movie Hidden Figures. See, that's just an example of what I'm saying, but we're not taught to see it this way. We have the atomic bomb program. 5 key black scientists worked on that project. I believe one was a woman, the rest were men. We didn't hear that. We didn't know that. That's what they do with the exceptions of us. They take them and use them to their end. Same thing was going on in Rome. So there's people that are born with spiritual potential that will overcome these obstacles, but it doesn't have to be that way. More people could be operating at the genius level if they were born into society which valued spirit and valued human potential. We are not in that society. And so we have the outcome of all children, let's say 90% of them or more, are born geniuses. But the system that they're born into doesn't value spirit, doesn't value their genius, and does things purposely to limit them and or to obliterate them. And I'll send you a link on that where scientists determine that. Another key factor in nurturing the natural genius of children is that they're born within families that have people who are in excel. And so ADOS children are less likely to have that, not because they have ignorant or stupid parents. It's because their parents too were born in a society that limited their genius potential. But for the few people who are able to squeak through and have their geniuses realized to some extent, they become models for the children. And the children tend to emulate those things. Again, the goal has been to suppress that. But for those exceptions that are able to meet through, especially during a time where ADOS people benefited during when there was more money circulation in the society, well, then you have children that have high potential. But sadly, a lot of those children become acculturated to white society in that they become the exception to the rule. They're the minority child in the group of whites. I mean, all this is meant to limit what J. Edgar Hoover and others also knew, the concern of the rise of a black messiah. So that's why the schools are the situation they're in. They're not failing schools. They are planned to fail schools. We have to see it that way. They're planned to fail. So hopefully this will, again, get people more activated politically, because it's a purposeful attempt to rob the children of optimal lives. So yes, all children are born geniuses, and so the mere fact that that's not realized to a tune of 90% of all children, but let's say black children, the fact that that is not happening is purposefully done.
Is this why there is now a preschool to prison pipeline? This is why they constantly diagnose our children with ADHD and put them on all kinds of drugs. Does this feed into this bigger plan, this bigger genocidal plan for us to eat the failure and the cost of slavery? Do you see is there a correlation? I definitely feel there's a correlation.
When integration was being more pressurized in the society, you have an explosion. This is in the 70s. You have an explosion of those diagnoses you mentioned. That's not on an accident. That answers the question. I'm trying not to be long-winded, but that answers the question. as integration was coming through, they did things to adjust. They mutated white domination races policy in terms of what happened in integrated schools. Not only that, they segregated integrated schools. And that's what you're just also identifying, but we're not taught to see it this way. So when you have more children going into schools, more black children going into white schools, quote unquote, you'll have an increase in such schools of, Excel programs and then special learning programs. You have those increase. I'm quite sure if someone did the research, they mapped school development, and all of a sudden the school didn't have those problems. They had a very tiny minority of children that had difficulty learning, and they would just be expected to keep up as best they could, and sometimes they get tutoring. But when you have integration, do you have a specialization of special learning and gifted classrooms? Where the gifted classrooms were overwhelmingly white, right? Or
Yep.
the occasional exceptional minority child in as a minority in the accelerated classrooms. Again, it's a way of purposefully having exceptional rule outcomes. And then you have a growth in special learning with the associated mental health diagnosis required in order to put them there. And it explodes as you go into the 70s. Prior to the 70s, prior to when integration was really being taken seriously in the society, you don't have those dynamics in schools. So the question is why? Well, the answer is easy. It was a way to limit the intellectual genius of black children as they were going to be getting more access to resources, right? Because that was
Yep.
the big call with the decision, the 54 decision. There was an access to resources, and so they just closed black schools and required blacks to go to white schools, assuming they would be automatically superior. Well, we got into some of those schools by the 70s as it was delayed, and characteristically in those schools, they merely mutated white domination practices by creating these avenues. So within the same school that were integrated, you have segregation. It's genius when you look at it. And I'm sorry, but it's genius. And we cooperated with it because we believed it was just the way the system worked. When it was really new to the system to adjust to integrating black children that would have a better chance of getting the resources they need and therefore their geniuses appreciated and nurtured.
Uh, yeah, it sounds like we signed our kids up for in trying to integrate into whiteness. It sounds like we, as Martin Luther King once said, ran our children into a burning building.
And sadly, when we look at the rates of special education assignments with black male children, and that's very key. And I'm not saying this by saying I'm neglecting black female children. I'm just saying because of our aggressive nature, because of our role as protectors and initiators, that has to be suppressed. So it's not crazy that levels of punishment and levels of special education assignment and mental health diagnosis to substantiate it are disproportionately reflected on black male children. They're also disproportionately impacting male children because of their aggressive nature that can be utilized for learning. And I'm going to get to that later.
Oh,
We're not taught to see it this way, but it's powerful. But that has to be suppressed because of the 60s, because of the 70s, where whites and blacks at times cooperated in changing the system, making the system a more humane system. But that has to be suppressed.
and that's the very thing that's missing at large in our society,
Yes.
and especially our communities. Dr. Amos Wilson effectively documented the natural genius of Black children and offered recommendations as to how Black parents can nurture this.
That's part 2 of the talking points. We can get to that right now.
Yes, I'm going through your talking
Second
point.
talking point. Uh-huh.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, that's right. So here, let me proceed there. In that work, Dr. Amos Wilson cited a study. It's a famous study among social scientists, but again, they don't allow this into conventional wisdom discourse. And it'll be very clear why. So, reading, whenever motor differences between white and Black American infants have been noted in research literature, the Black babies have been advanced in comparison with whites. This is also the case with Black children of other nationalities, particularly those of African origin. The African babies actually seem to have been born at a more advanced stage of development, since many of their activities are less than a week, at less than a week, correspond to those performed by European children aged 4 to 8 weeks. Comparisons in this study show the following differences between these groups. So first I'm going to talk about the measured accomplishment, and this was done in the 70s because people wanted to know, as integration was taking place, how would Black children perform, because they really wanted to know how we would have deficits, but they were blown away with the results. All right, here it goes. And this is not just American children. As a result of this study, they went around the world doing these studies and found the same outcomes. Here it goes. The accomplishment: being drawn up into a sitting position, able to prevent the head from falling backwards. For European children, they're able to accomplish this in 6 weeks on average. Okay, you with me?
Yes.
For African babies, they're able to accomplish this within 9 hours.
Whoa.
Whoa. You look like Neo in the Matrix right there.
Well,
that's the effect this should have if you haven't heard this before. And the problem is you should have heard this before. Yeah. The next accomplishment: with head held firmly, looking at the face of the examiner. European babies are able to accomplish this in 8 weeks. African babies are able to accomplish this in 2 days. On average. There's some that'll do worse. There's some that'll do even better than that. But on average, in 2 days. Accomplishment: supporting herself in a sitting position and watching her reflection in a mirror. European babies, 20 weeks. African babies, 7 weeks. Accomplishment: holding herself upright. European babies, 9 months. African babies, 5 months. Accomplishment: taking the round block out of its hole in the form board. European babies, 11 months. African babies, 5 months.
Oh my God.
Accomplishment: standing against the mirror. European babies, 9 months. African babies, 5 months. Walking to the GeAzan box to look inside. European babies, 15 months. African babies, 7 months. The last accomplishment: climbing the steps alone. European babies, 15 months. African babies, 11 months. And that's it. And that was documented in Dr. Amos Wilson's work. the developmental psychology of the black child. And that
Um,
was so that African parents could know that their children already have a born human, what really shouldn't be seen as an advantage, is just their humanity. And it can be nurtured. And it's not, and we know it's not going to be done effectively in schools. Not just because they're black, but because the society doesn't need highly intelligent populations. But they particularly don't want them among ADOS because of people like Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Fannie Lou Hamer. They had certain levels of intelligences that could draw the attention of the masses of people. Fred Hampton had to be killed at 21 because he had great linguistic intelligence. That's another level of intelligence. We just say people have the gift of gab. Well, those people have a form of intelligence that should be appreciated and
um,
nurtured.
Thank you so much. Let me go to some of my guest comments. You know, they are my co host as well. Thank you, Nikki Clanton, for joining the live. She says that many so called crack babies born in the 80s exhibited exceptional abilities as adults. Children's brains have powerful regenerative capabilities. Paula Barnett says, thank you for joining the live, Paula. Dr. Francis Cress Welsling told us this. This system is diabolical and has done a horrible devolution to humanity as a whole. Um, what can we do to nurture this for my audience? First of all, just having this knowledge helps us, many ADOS, to understand that their children don't have learning disabilities and that what you have shared, in fact, shows our genius. What can
Yes.
you advise to my parents that are watching um, on how to nurture this at home?
Okay, right now I'll give an anecdotal example and later I'll get more specific because we have the other talking points.
Sure.
But the anecdotal one is that I was approached, um, and it was because of Yafa Bay, that I was doing a lecture on the Holy Mother and African spirituality. And I was approached by one of the mothers because of the things I was saying, similar to this. And she said, well, they were getting her in a room basically at her child's school and talking to her about his need for being in special education. And I said, well, most special education referrals are really not necessary. I mean, that's just how obvious it is. Some are, but most aren't. So I told her to fight it, and I just left it at that. Well, she came back to me and said, well, I resisted it, but they were giving me all kinds of reasons. And I said to her, I said, well, did they even do an analysis of him yet? How did they know that for sure? And she said they hadn't even done an analysis because they need a mental health diagnosis in order to make the placement. And I said, well, then the reality is, ma'am, and I'm still just talking off the top of my head. The reality is that, um, and I'll just start at the starting point of Obama. He cooperated with private industry that wanted to make money off of the school system. So they label schools bad, and it makes it easier to either close them down or to put such tight restrictions on them that forces them to put more children in a classroom. So that was happening big time in Chicago, so much so that the teachers and parents got together and started protests, which was good, but it didn't get much coverage. And so what happens is when schools get torn down and children are forced to increasing levels of classrooms where the size is grown like in New York City to the tune of 35, 40 children in a classroom, you're going to have children that are going to be eligible for special learning. And there's two reasons why. The two reasons is that one, that many children cannot learn at the same pace. And so there's going to be some children that are going to move at a slower pace, but that's going to ruin the teachers' needed high stakes outcomes. So teachers are driven to, to push children into such scenarios of needing special learning. And sadly, it's a way of thinning the herd. Less children to deal with, more children have a better chance of succeeding. And that's how they're forced to think in terms of of educational triage in that sense. The numbers pressure them into singling out males. Well, what are the males or children that people will ask less questions about? Whose parents less likely to have money with to attorneys to fight such situations? It's going to be black children. And since black males are exceedingly more aggressive because of how black males and males in general are socialized in our society, we know through child studies that male children are handled a little bit more rougher. They're more likely to be thrown up in the air, that sort of thing. And that's the beginning of the socialization process where girls are more acclimatable within the context of classroom. But they still also, because they're black as girls, also get penalized a lot too versus their white female counterparts. So so you have a need of teachers to thin the herd, and that is to get children that are moving at a slower pace and also may have behavioral problems, not just because they have behavioral problems and things may be going having problems in the home, which stems from that a lot. But it's because they're overburdened by the number of children they have to compete with in order to learn. So they act out to gain attention. And so this is not beyond the realms of childhood development. But in a smaller size classroom, such behaviors would be less present. And they know this. So again, the school system is meant to be a failure when those things are happening. These are indications of failure, not the child has a problem. The system has the problem. And I got tired of cooperating with that system because I was the mental health side of that. I got a lot of school referrals and I would give the diagnosis and I would say, well, there's more going on here. Well, we can't pay attention to that right now. We just got to see to the need of the child. No, you've got to see to the need of fitting your class size so that you can get your scores up so you can keep your job or get your bonus or whatever. You know,
Oh
it's
my God.
diabolical. It's built into the system. And we know through research that all children do better in smaller class sizes. That's number one. And number two, specifically to ADOS children do exceptionally well in smaller class sizes and culturally based included curriculums that appeals to their and speaks to their blackness, Africanness, African Americanness, whatever. That children in such environments do better. That means there's less of a need for special education and mental health diagnosis to support such specializations. So smaller class sizes and culturally competent curriculums is a key for helping to tap into the genius of black children.
Would
And
that
those
mean,
studies were completed like 5 years ago.
I'm taking notes, family, when you see me look away. Um, does that mean either homeschooling or to place our children in schools that are black schools?
We are placed in elements of desperation, and sadly, we've got people fighting for each other's replacements into magnet schools, and seeing that as an answer. We're just put at a place of desperation, and so one could be proactive, avoiding the desperation, and do homeschooling. That is a critical element, but we're also put into pressures of time. So back to this family. So they asked me what could be done. At this time, I stopped being a little flippant with them because I saw they were serious. A lot of people aren't serious, really, in my humble opinion, not serious enough. Well, anyway, so I provided what I did for my daughters. I provided the latest in brain studies, which at the time with my daughters I didn't have access to. I just had this knack with children. I was a preschool teacher. and I really enjoyed that portion of my life. And the other was what we do know in education. We know that the model, and when I say this, everybody's going to know this. The model is based on farming and industry, which ultimately became corporations. So that our 9 month school is centered around farming life. Well, we haven't had that life for most Americans, well, almost 100 years ago. Why are they continuing that process? Well, again, in our society and elite families, they go to school year round. Experience. Of course, because they're wealthy, they could take, month-long trips and enjoy life more. But basically, when they come back home, they've either got the tutor or they go to the school that's open year round and they get educated. But the rest of the population, that's not needed. Okay, so because they're not needed intellectual wise.
Daud,
So what I did with the family, I
sorry,
applied
Daud,
these
excuse
principles,
me.
and within
Ex-
3 weeks, the teacher of the child, yeah, sorry, are you breaking up?
Yeah, you're breaking up.
Okay, I heard you clearly that time.
Yes, you were breaking up for me.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear
Okay,
you now very
you're
clearly.
you're
I
clear
don't
to
know
me
what.
now. Am I okay? Well, after 3 weeks of working with the family, I didn't just work with the child. Matter of fact, I didn't even see the child. I gave prescriptions to the family to do, and basically for 3 weeks they were to do 5 minutes in the first week, 10 minutes in the second week, and in the third week, 15 minutes total time of just spending time with the child in a learning environment that they created at home, especially in this first segment. They were just to do things the child wanted to do to learn. Now, this is the child that has behavior problems and learning problems displayed at school. After 3 weeks of just that, didn't even get to the stuff that I wanted them to, just that, spending that special time of learning and nurturing in a learning environment created at the home, the teacher asked the parent, what are you doing with this child? He's really seeming better. Behaviorally, mainly. I knew that's what she meant. And they came back to ask me, the parents did. Said this teacher said this, and we're happy because she's talking a little less about the referral to special education. She wants to know what we're doing. And I said, don't tell her a daggone thing. She's 40 years old with children who are adults. She should know what I was doing. But again, to some extent, I don't blame her, but at a lot of extent, I do, because she's in the system and she's been acculturated in that system. And so she was interested in calling the herd. Now she was talking less. This is before COVID took off. She was talking less about his referral. She wanted to know more about what the parents were doing. And all the parents were doing was spending quality time, not a whole lot of time when we got to 3 weeks of 15 minutes, but they were doing a learning activity that the child would choose to do during 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and 15 minutes. That was enough to help him behaviorally acculturate better within the classroom. we didn't
Wow.
even get to the hard. We didn't even get to the hard stuff. So sadly, we also, as adults, get acculturated to the system as well, in that school is the place for learning. And I know that there are exceptions to this, but the problem is there are exceptions. The home is the basis of learning. And the mother had been the primary nurturer. I'm not saying that the woman's place is just to do that. I'm an exception in that sense, because in my household, when I was married to my first wife, I was the nurturer. She had a very low tolerance for that. She was highly technical. She was an engineer. Uh, she loved the babies as much as I did, but she had a low tolerance for children not being able to perform immediately. I had the patience of the goddess, and I had no problem, and I had fun nurturing them intellectually. So much so that I had the results that I shared with you earlier. That my daughters were testing at the second grade level as they entered kindergarten, and it wasn't just because they were naturally born geniuses, but they were in a home environment that recognized that and nurtured that as a regular aspect of our life as a family. And so, just by spending up to 15 minutes in the third week with their child in a specialized time that was it was announced the child was to be learning. Also during that time, I just said if the child picks his nose during that time, you're to praise him for it. Positive self-regard is a way of nurturing the brain to acculturate whatever you're engaged in at that moment. And he was told it was learning, and he was being praised a lot for every little thing that he did, and it was his idea to do the learning objective. How did this translate into school? He was more focused, he was more behaviorally acceptable to the teacher's eyes, so much so that the teacher was asking, what are you doing with this child? It was nothing different from what I've just shared with you. So that's a quick thing I've given to the parents right now. They can create learning environments, a place where it's sacred. It's sacred, where books and other material can be placed in that one place, not in their room somewhere, not everywhere else. A special place they designate for learning. And they can begin by doing what the child wants, but it's in the context of learning. They need to learn a skill. If there's a skill, the other plan for the family I had was this is a skills that you want them to have as parents. Things that you believed that they were too young to do, things that they may even have expressed an interest in doing, expose them to during that time frame. And do the time frame, I was working them up to a half hour. After the half hour, don't do anything. Just do what you're going to do within 30 minutes and build up to it slowly, and they will marvel you with what they're able to accomplish. Why? Because children are born geniuses. We believe they're just children. And we limit them based on entertainment and cultural corporation values that oversell you Disney products and not learning products. There's a school, and I'll end with this. There's a school in California that had teachers, some of them not even certified. Some of them were volunteers. And I can't remember the name of the school. And they were volunteers at his high school. And the children there would participate in scholarship awards, and they were doing so well they started competing with majority white schools and affluent schools, and they beat them. This was back in the 80s. You didn't hear about it. And so people wondered what this school was doing. Well, some of it is what I've just shared with you, and the other stuff I'm going to share towards the end here when I get to my other points. And it blew people away. So was this school celebrated? Was this school used as a model for what other so-called poor community children can do? Because they were in a poor community and they competed. And this is in California back in the 80s, early 90s. No, it wasn't heralded as an exception. You have, and I have to go to another example. You have that beautiful woman out of Chicago
Yes.
who made it in 60 minutes. I'm sorry, I can't remember her name right now.
Yeah.
She was particularly working.
Was it Marva Collins?
Exactly. Marva Collins. Marva Collins' Way is a book. I got that book. I used that book. All right. So you have an inner city lady working with and focusing on inner city children, putting the quotes up. And she did marvelous things with them. Why didn't, and this was during the George Bush 1 era where he said he was the education president. And he gave her favorable ranking. But then all you had to do was copy her model and put it in American schools if you care. They didn't. That's another indication of the limiting and obliterating forces because that ruined it. For me, I'm saying he's the education president. And here's Marva Collins showing these children were functioning at superior levels in the grade school area. What's up here? Why wasn't her model then utilized as a curriculum around American schools, especially those schools that have problems, such as the community she was working in out of Chicago? This is an indication they don't want that. And they'll do things to limit that. So they'll celebrate it as an exception. and purposely not integrated as a solution because they don't want it solved.
Ooh, that Daud GeAzan fire family. Uh, I'm going to your third talking point. This society and culture has proven it has absolutely no interest in limiting the genius potential in Black children. Wait, I'm sorry. Let me back that up. You did an addendum. You did a revision of that. This society and culture has proven it has absolutely no interest in promoting the genius potential in Black children.
And this is despite the evidence. Here's the evidence. And I just gave one. I'm going to get more specific here. So we know Blacks excel athletically. What does this mean? Blacks can excel also in other areas of life as well. The ancient past is a clear guide. Pyramids, engineering and architectural sciences. Pyramids cannot be produced today. With today's technology and so-called superior intelligence of European societies, they can't reproduce a pyramid. Brain surgery was done in ancient times. Successful brain surgeries. That's the medical sciences. Sigitolo and Polotolo that cannot be seen by the naked eye. These are stars. With a major star, Sigitolo, and Polotolo is an invisible star where it orbits around Sigitolo. They cannot be seen by the naked eye, but this has been documented by French explorers, and this revealed the science capabilities of the Dogon. This is astrophysics, astrological, and I would say spiritual sciences that were not foreign to African mystics of the ancient era, particularly women of the ancient era. And the first documented multi-genius we know, celebrate, I guess what's called the conscious community now, is Imhotep, the first multi-genius. So how often do you get to hear of multi-geniuses as Black being celebrated? You literally don't in this society. You hear Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo and that sort of thing, but you don't get to hear these African ones. Well, people criticize people for going back that far, saying you're just living in the past. And I say that there's some who do that, but the past is a benchmark. And it can be seen as a way to why isn't this happening today? Well, it is happening today. It's just not harnessed. I'm going to give you two examples, which in addition to the earlier one will make more sense. How about the recent past? Katherine Johnson was an American mathematician whose calculations of orbital mechanics as a NASA employee were critical to the success of the first and subsequent U.S. crewed space flights. This movie was made recently, Hidden Figures, which illustrated her and other Black women intellectual prowess. All right? How about another person from the recent past? And this is where I'll spend most of the time to illustrate something more important. Paul Leroy Robeson. Paul Robeson, as he's popularly known, was an African-American bass baritone concert pianist and artist and stage and film actor who became famous for his cultural accomplishments and for his political activism. Educated at Rutgers College and Columbia University, he was also a star athlete in his youth. He also studied Swahili and linguistics at the School of Oriental and African Studies, London. His political activities began with his involvement with unemployed workers and anti-imperialist students whom he met in Britain, and continued with support for the Loyalist cause in the Spanish Civil War and his opposition to fascism. We were talking about that yesterday.
Yes, we were.
In the United States, he also became active in the civil rights movement and other social justice campaigns. His sympathies for the Soviet Union, for communism, and his criticism of the United States government and its foreign policies caused him to be blacklisted during the McCarthy era. We talked about that too yesterday and how they revisit that upon us. In 1915, Robeson won an academic scholarship to Rutgers College, where he was twice named a consensus All-American in football and was the class valedictorian. Almost 80 years later, he was inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame. He received his LLB law degree from Columbia Law School while playing in the National Football League. At Columbia, he sang and acted in off-campus productions. After graduating, he became a figure in the Harlem Renaissance with performances in The Emperor Jones and All God's Children Got Wings. So what is he displaying clearly that we can learn from? He is explaining, he's demonstrating physical and intellectual and behavioral prowess. What do I mean? Because the society doesn't need high intellectuals, it needs bodies to perform in the corporate cog. In one form of the corporate cog, sports entertainment, the physical prowess of poor people in general, but Black people specifically, are utilized, nurtured, and encouraged. Sadly, even this is how we also have given into the system, we praise children for intellectual prowess as it's displayed physically. And we tend to limit it intellectually as it relates to the classroom. I'll use myself as an example because I don't mean to be anti people just getting by, but it's hurting our children. I was walking at 4 months or 5 months. I was riding a bicycle without training wheels by age 3. I was reading by age 4. Okay, so what people nurtured me in, what the adults were saying around me, he's going to be a great football player.
Wow.
Now, you can't blame them to some degree because they're looking for a way that the dominant society accepts us in a way because it does benefit them financially, but also can potentially benefit us financially. So we're slowly nurtured into valuing the physical. But you take a look at Paul Robeson. He should be the model, not Michael Jordan, especially because his activism was quite poor. His advocacy was quite poor. But we can marvel at his physical capabilities. Well, here we have Paul Robeson, who is showing genius in multiple levels of human engagement. So, what is the biggest point I'm making? People who have mental, whether it be through biochemical or through brain damage or born with limitations, we know they can't bounce balls very well. We know they can't catch a ball very well. We know they can't run in a coordinated, rhythmic fashion, right? So, the ability of the human body to be motivated in such a way that shows extreme rhythm, that shows extreme capabilities of physical prowess, should be seen as a sign of intellectual capability. That means if they're doing well on a playground or in a ball field, they should be also expected to do exceptionally well in the classroom. Why? Because it takes your brain function to fire neurons in such an efficient way, communicating between the left and right hemispheres of the brain to do what you see them doing on a ball court or a football field. That's why. If they have that level of physical kinesthetic intelligence, that means they also have that potential in a classroom. In other words, my brother was a coach. Black men performing well on a basketball court who are taking weather in college, not them, but their parents should be ashamed. But they're hoping that that child will get that bag. They put all their love in him in terms of his physical prowess for a game and not in the expectations of him also getting an academic scholarship because his ability to do what he does in the court is an indicator of his high intellectual capability in a classroom. We tend to separate the two. We call it the dumb jock. We call it the, and people and children learn to emulate that because they're getting praised for the athletic. They're not getting praised so much for the intellectual classroom display of that same physical ability. In other words, it takes high intellectual capability to do what they're doing physically. But we've been taught to value separating the two. One cannot work without the other. So that means it's displayed physically on the ball court, but it can also be those same fantastic moves can be done in a classroom with learning. Think of how we ourselves have cheated the children of their potentials as human beings. Paul Robeson should be the model, not Michael Jordan.
That was a fire point. I'm just like, oh, Daud. That was, wow.
It makes so much sense, doesn't it?
I'm really at a loss for words, but that demonstration of our intellect through our physicality, I've never heard it put in that manner. I just the way you unpack
and
things.
Social scientists know this. Social scientists know this, and they utilize this for children in elite schools. They have exercise programs, all kinds of programs, and they know that the benefit will be more intellectual development. The more coordinated you are, the more intellectual capacity you have to perform academically. We purposely have not been exposed to that. We purposely have been disproportionately reliant on the physicality. And therefore, we played a role, sadly, in limiting their intellectual capabilities as displayed in the classroom. But we praise them and give all kinds of attention to their intellectual capabilities physically. When you can't have one without the other. You can't.
I'm going to move to your next talking point because we're at 72 minutes. And number 4, this society and culture is in fact a hostile environment for Black children. They are comparative examples of this.
And that's, again, what I just shared with you, how we too play a role in limiting them because of our expectations. And those expectations are nurtured in this society. So the comparative examples are 1968 or 1986. This is when I had my wake up call to this. This is the quintessential seed that was planted in me to realize this, and it prepared me to be a better preschool teacher. So you have the example that someone said, you quoted someone earlier who talked about the issue of crack babies. Well, I was there. It was my first job out of college where I worked in the Poconos with New York children, and I was to specialize in helping them because they had these deficits because they were crack babies, quote unquote. And I won an award because a lot of the children wanted to play with me, and I created a nurturing environment for them. Did I have difficulties? Yes, but I overcame those difficulties, and so much so that the first time it was a Christian Herald organization. They awarded me 2 awards, and they had never awarded anybody an award before. They did it for me because I was supposedly working with the children that were unreachable, and I was able to take on other children from other groups because the children were having so much fun with me. What I did was, in brief, all I did was put them in positions of leadership and say, you don't want this to go bad, you don't want this to go wrong, and we'll all take turns being the leader, but we're going to get things done, and you're going to lead us to getting those things done. Putting that pressure on them to perform made them self-check themselves so they could achieve the praise. Because I imitated my mother. She would give me. I was the school guy nerd. I played music, played a lot of instruments as a child, and one of them was the saxophone. And in the band, my mother during football games, she would be cheering for me as though the football game was going on. So I would imitate her when I would reward children. Yeah, she was phenomenal. I would reward children in a lavish way for the littlest things they did, and they really got a lot out of it. So the comparative example that I witnessed in 1986 during the Olympic Games was a Cuban boxer fighting an American boxer. And you know how ABC Sports back in that day did those exposés on their history. And the African American was a black gentleman who, very similar to Mike Tyson, this is just a few years before Mike Tyson's rise, that this guy was on the streets at age 14 beating up adults. And so they wanted to take that ability, his ability, and put it in boxing and get something out of it. And it's sad, it's cruel, but that's how we get out of the hood sort of mentality. We got to get out of that mentality. I know it's real, it seems real, but we gotta go beyond it in terms of our expectations. So the only time his prowess is given any recognition is because he's a teenager able to beat up adults. And so we got to turn that into something that'll make money for other people again.
Yep.
So here we take the Cuban background they gave. This young man, this is the light heavyweight class. This young man, because of the environmental demands of his society being under embargo from the United States, they have a different expectation and pressure for life in that environmental demand, which is we've got a few people, we've got a lot of need, so we have to expect that children have to be better at more than one thing. And this also exemplifies my Paul Robson model as to our expectations and the capability and potential of children, particularly black children. So here you had a darker skinned black person from Cuba who, expert boxer, who had a doctorate in chemistry and engineering, fighting against the American boxer who rose up out of the streets, and they're both meeting in the ring. Now, it doesn't matter who won. And I was just flabbergasted at the background history. Here there are two black people, definitely, two black people. One has 2 doctorates in chemistry and engineering, and the other one didn't get out of high school. Now, what's up with that? I asked myself. How is this possible? If I buy what I've been taught to nurture, that if you're black, well, this guy was coal black. He must have, how is it that he possesses 2 highly intellectually qualified degrees and he's fighting against a person that barely makes it out of high school? But the guy in America has these fantastic skills. And I reasoned that in order to have those fantastic skills, he had to have a super brain. But the brain in America was limited to just getting out of the hood, while the brain in Cuba was allowed to venture into their natural talents that would be of help to the society. So he had a natural talent for boxing because he had all that brain activity. They utilized that brain activity in chemistry. They needed that brain activity in engineering. 2 black people, but in 2 different environmental demands. That's my point 4.
Okay, and go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was about to go to your final point.
That's fine.
Okay. Solutions utilizing multiple intelligence theory and the latest in brain research approaches can help our children to lead and live optimal lives. I'll repeat that. Solutions: utilizing multiple intelligence theory and the latest in brain research approaches can help our children to lead and live optimal lives.
So, the multiple brain theory stems from a theory that a gentleman had back in the 1980s. This has been long known in the 1980s. It, like Marva Collins' approach, this could have revolutionized learning in America, but it's been suppressed. The schools that have the most resources are the ones that have been able to include multiple intelligence theory into their curriculums. The struggling schools are just trying to get better grades. That's not by accident, it's by design. So the multiple intelligence theory posits that the human being cannot be limited to what's simply going to be benefiting corporations, because that limits them automatically. We have, as human beings, the person who developed the theory, we have verbal linguistic intelligence. We have logical mathematical intelligence. Now, right now, I've already dealt with Paul Robeson and the gentle lady I mentioned earlier, Miss Catherine. We have spiritual, spatial, intellectual capabilities. We have bodily, kinesthetic, the movement of the body. You, loving of dance and entertainment, those were your levels of expressive intelligence. Musical and rhythmic intelligence, critical for the brain and its learning. Notice they're getting those out of the schools. Again, as integration takes place, all of a sudden schools could not afford music and other so-called extracurricular activities anymore because they had to focus people on just getting tests. I submit that was a plan to limit our intellectual growth. Music and moving the body rhythmically is a sign of intelligence, and it helps to nurture the brain to be more intelligent.
Wow.
Interpersonal intelligence, the abilities of relationships. Paul Robeson again. Intrapersonal relationships. I'm sorry, the first one, interpersonal, is basically knowing yourself real well. All this education is to get us external. We also need to be internal as human beings, and there's an intelligence for that. Intrapersonal, abilities of relationships and understanding relationships. Basically, being an automatic psychologist. That's a sign of intelligence that people have. And I see it in children. When I was in treatment, there were actual children, 12 or 13, who actually effectively raised their parents. That's intelligence. I mean, I'm serious. There are children that have raised parents.
Can you please unpack
that? Nurtured
that?
Parents. Okay. Again, the children are born geniuses. We just limit them, and also we limit our perception of them.
Yeah.
But children can tap into your emotional stability. They can weaken it. So let's take a sick child. You're already predisposed to being sensitive to their illness, and they're perpetually ill. Well, they're not lazy. They tend to hone that, and we know it. They work it for everything it's got to meet their other needs. That's normal. It needs to be shaped so that it's not destructive, because that's what it can happen to it. It can become destructive. So let's take a healthy child. Same thing. They have emotional needs, and they tap in really early. I mean, before they're able to speak, they're able to tap into your emotional elements of excitement and elements of concern, and they're able to manipulate it subtly. They don't have the words for this. They just intellectually are able to do this because of their divine intelligence. So you had I'll give you an example where a child acted out at school, and he comes home and he looks down. He's very depressed, and because he's already spent years nurturing mother and father on being very sensitive to his emotional state. And the mother immediately, instead of confronting him for the bad, inappropriate thing he did at school, immediately goes to comforting him and saying he's not bad, everything will be okay. He needs discipline, people, and there's nothing wrong with that. But he doesn't want discipline. So he's nurtured you into appealing to his need of emotional stability when he's emotionally straight. The example I'm giving you, I've rated this child. He's he's a 7-year-old child. He has the emotional, intellectual ability of a 21-year-old, but he's driven by the emotional status of a 3-year-old. And that is, if the parents aren't on their game, they're going to be susceptible to being raised by that child.
Let me let me let me.
Not totally, because
I've got to jump in and share a funny story from Mother's Day. So my daughter's dad and I, separated when she was like 8 weeks old, and so we co-parent. But I had gotten involved when she was in the second grade with a really nice gentleman, and my daughter at 7 was schooling me about how I can't have a boyfriend, I can't fall in love, I can't get married. No, that was unacceptable to her. And I said, well, why don't you interfere with your father's love life the way you do mine? And she said, because mommy, you are soft. My daddy will beat my butt with his belt if I try to interfere with his love life. But you're soft, mommy. I was like, how in the world can this child get my number? And she's only 7, but she got me all the way figured out at 7 years old.
And I submit they do it at the nonverbal level. And this is what they realized in the 1954 study that we're not told to focus on purposely. It's the work of psychologist uh, uh, George Clark and his wife. They're the ones that did the famous doll study that between ages 4 and 6, the child knows men have power, white men have more power, women are considered weak, black people are considered weak, and they're preferred. So they learn between ages 4 and 6. They just are more honest about it if you address it. Just people don't feel comfortable addressing it. I first found out about it in 1984 in psychology class where they talked about Dr. Clark's work. But this is why those 9 white men on the Supreme Court decided in favor of Brown, was because of the psychological damage that takes place upon black children being in a white society, period, let alone school. And that is they learn to hate themselves. And sadly, adults who are also nurtured that way learn to hate themselves. But we don't say that in our minds. We just act it out through our subconscious behaviors because that's what it's been inundated with since it's breathed American air. So that American black children are disproportionately suffering in levels of, and people even link this genetically to our enslavement experience. They are predisposed to hating themselves, and this can be distributed by the doll study, where they attributed positive characteristics to the white baby and negative characteristics to the black child. When they get to beyond age 6, though, they learn that hurts their parents' feelings, and so their intelligence adapts. So they just learn not to talk about it, but they act it out in various ways.
Yes, they do.
All right, and so this is just another indication of that. In some ways, they submit to it. In some ways, they exert it. And some of the disrespectful behavior that you see from children are their frustrations with learning to hate themselves. We just see it as them being an act out behavior. But some of this stems from their resistance to being self-hating themselves. And it just explodes from time to time. But again, we just see it as them being either disrespectful or disobedient, when in fact they're rebelling against the environmental demands the adult has refused to take control of.
Let me ask you, how in the world, in a country that has social media and the annihilation of our beautiful people by the cops and each other, how do you nurture? I mean, I do everything in my power to sow into my daughter her brilliance and her beauty. But when all she has to do is turn to secular music, which is diabolical in its nature, as far as I'm concerned, the things these rap artists are rapping about are just total destruction of our children's self-esteem, their intellect, their whole entire being. Because, music, in my humble opinion, is being weaponized against us. When you have these trash lyrics over old school beats that they've sampled oftentimes that degrade our Black girls and have them acting out like, just video whores in many ways, and twerking, and then they are promoting drug and alcohol and all different type of substance abuse in the music. Then they're promoting suicide in this music. Just a self-loathe and a self-hate. They are popularizing prison culture, sagging of the pants. Like, to me, a lot of what I have to manage with my daughter is because of the music and the social media that I do everything in my power to limit. But because she goes to school, she still gets exposed to that, even if I say no, not in my car. I mean, they're encouraging sex, they're encouraging homosexuality. There is a war on the minds of our children, Dawood, that we didn't have to contend with growing up. I was able
Mhm.
to focus on music and dance and fashion shows and beauty pageants and acting, one of my loves. I
Mhm.
was in every sport, and I have her in track
Yeah.
to keep her distracted in as much that I can. And I've got her, I put my thumb on her when it comes to her education, but I had a different upbringing, and the things that are being weaponized against our children that I now have to contend with to keep my daughter, on the straight. What can we do about their self-esteem and them seeing our people treated worse than dogs in the street by everyone?
Mhm.
What can we do
Um,
to help our children overcome this overstimulation in the world that they don't mean anything to the world? How do we
your
overcome that?
question, yeah, your question is answered in by the question itself and what I stated earlier. This is a society that limits or obliterates natural black genius. So that means you are forced to, and this is why I don't have many friends. This is why I don't have, this is why my first wife, one of the reasons my first wife wanted to leave me was because she was afraid that my children would become me because I'm not well liked. I'm not well appreciated. Um, because of the very things you're talking about, I was willing to take a stand on. I limited the children's television watching. I limited their comings and goings into places where I knew would not foster my values. But my wife, who grew up poor and struggling, and so that's one of the reasons why I cared for her. She was one of those exceptions to the rules. She was in rural North Carolina. They didn't get a in-house toilet until the 90s. They didn't get a telephone until the early 2000s. There are places like that, like Tone talks about in Alabama. She came from that, and so her values, which I thought, the woman hopes the man will change, and this is what I hope to change in my wife, was that her value was to imitate European values and white people. And so she saw my attempts with our daughters as limiting them. So this is the conflict we have. This is the difficulty we have. It was doable in the 80s if we took more of this route, but we were sort of blinded by the potential capabilities that a few blacks were having during that time as the decadent veil became more entrenchedly used. For me, I don't necessarily condemn the artist for doing what the system has provided, and it's done it purposely. Here's the best illustration. uh, jazz, uh, swing before jazz, uh, rhythm and blues. They all have periods of time where they reign in the public mind, but they also have periods of time where they fall. It's usually 20 to 30 years. A new generation then does something new. Well, we have what we know as rap and associated culture coming out of the 70s and 80s, especially as integration was taking place and they were limiting music in schools. So, what did people do? What did the African genius do? It adapted, creating the genre of rap, which was at first not accepted. Well, there was so much money to be made, it has effectively been taken over. But here we are going into the second decade of the next century. So that's 50 years later. Rap is still a significant genre because it's been artificially made to go beyond the usual time. Something new should have surfaced. And what was new surfacing in the 1990s? Neo soul. But it was
Yes.
suppressed. Because it didn't have the values that would exploit and limit intelligence among an undesirable group in the society. And there was so much money still to be made off of it, as they're showing. It's around the world. But it's gone beyond the time of usual usefulness to the society. Something new should have taken place, and something new did. Neo soul in the 90s, but it was purposely suppressed. So I can't blame the artist for that. I can be upset with him, maybe, but I have to realize that there's a larger thing afoot here. And it's the same thing that's afoot that controls and impacts the outcome of schools.
Sean Allen Rector says the Marva Collins story should be read and watched by us all. Ironically, that movie is difficult to retrieve and not so ironic, right, family? I remember watching Cicely Tyson play this role and thinking, I want to go to that school. Paula Barnett says, take a moment and consider how much further the world would have advanced by now without parasitic capitalism. It is mind blowing.
And that what engulfs the artist, because we're that they are our outlet for success, but we have to dance to their tune, literally, and that is not for our betterment in the long term. So what we're being pressed to politically is because we've given into the lesser two evils for so long. The ADOS movement has said we don't care about Trump. We love our children more. See, that's why I'm down with the ADOS crew. We're willing to take the hit. We're willing to take the hit because we took 60 years lackadaisically going along with their flow, hoping for the best. Well, we got to stop that. And we're now in the point where, well, you're going to let Trump win. I don't care about Trump. I love my children more. I can care less about Trump. I'm willing to take this hit because we spent 60 years allowing this to happen. So we got to sacrifice. And this is a sacrifice. And we got to sacrifice for at least a 20-year period to make sure we create a better political outcome for our children.
We are with you all the way, Daud. Go ahead.
Simply, two of those approaches are to utilize the multiple intelligence theory into your homes. Forget the freaking school, especially if you're at one of those schools that you feel doesn't care. Well, the feeling's not coming from nowhere. Also, whole brain studies. Now, this is what I found in working with a family, and because I was working with this family and had that turnaround that I shared with you, they shared it with other families. Now I'm helping 3 families now. And I'm doing it for nothing because it needs to be done. All right. So, but what I found was, and this is the quintessential truth, because we have intergenerational trauma going on. Intergenerational trauma. So what do I mean? So as they're implementing some of these behaviors, especially the whole brain intelligence approach with the latest in brain studies, the adults started experiencing problems. A lot of it exacerbated because of what's happened with COVID-19. People have to stay in each other's proximities longer, and they're triggering each other's trauma. So what they could not function and provide the things that I outlined for them for their children because of their trauma issues surfacing. So what am I saying? So the very model that will help the brain harmonize between the left and right brain hemispheres, which will increase intelligence in children, will do the same thing for adults. But also adults with their trauma of not having their genius realized and often damaged because of life situations and circumstances, whether it be exploitation or trauma induced because of the society that values them less. I've also told them to share the things that I'm teaching you to do with your children with the adults too. And we've only gotten to the first out of 12 approaches, brain enhancing approaches. We're stuck at one because the adults got triggered, which interrupted their ability to be consistent for the children. I said, no, I'm not going to be with you guys if you're going to damage the children because of your stuff. And again, it's not to blame you because I see this stuff is connected to your trauma issues that were created in your childhood that never got addressed. And this is interrupting your ability, allowing the example I gave earlier, where the son was in one way raising the parents because of their own issues. And so the approach that I told them to do with the children, they're to do for the adults too. And I'll give you that first one here, and I'll give you the link where they can get access to the book and do it themselves and apply those other principles that will increase left-right hemisphere brain activity that will have a result in enhancing their intelligence. Here it is. When there's an act-out behavior, the child typical act-out behavior, doing anything that you find inappropriate, or your mate doing anything appropriate, acting out of their character, for instance, you are to take them and hold them physically. You are to feel for their body tension. You are to process with them the emotional state they were in that resulted in the behavior they displayed. I can give you the science for this, but I'd rather go through the motions of giving you the technique. You are to have that person identify the feeling they were having that motivated them to do the inappropriate behavior. You are then to share how you feel about that feeling and how it makes you feel. That lets that person know that you're really hearing them and that that feeling impacts someone they love. This works especially if you created a strong bond with your child or your mate. This will really test the limits in a lot of ways. And hopefully be an avenue to create even greater bonds with your children and with your mates. The last stage is to have the child or person take that emotion and explain how they can better deal with that feeling. And in doing so, you be quiet and let them solve it themselves. If it goes on a long time and they really can't seem to get the answer, then maybe give them a little help, but you to give them every opportunity to solve it themselves. In a child, this will nurture their natural innate ability to problem solve. Now, you can only imagine how this helps in other areas, but particularly in terms of their behavior and emotional states, what this does is help the brain, the right brain, to integrate intellectually with the left brain and harmonize, all right, to problem solving. This will allow the left and right hemisphere of the brain to better communicate. And so one of the things that anthropologists and psychologists have learned about the ancient Africans who built those pyramids, they describe them as whole brain thinkers. In the society that we're born into, it leans toward the left side of the brain. Now, this is not absolute, but overall, European societies emphasize left brain quantitative, not qualitative, but quantitative reasoning. Well, the human brain needs more than that. And this first process out of 12 will help to harmonize left brain thinking process along with emotional states that are disproportionately located in the right hemisphere. Once they're able to get through this reasoning exercise, at first, these will probably be long sessions. But the more this is done, this will help the brain to harmonize both their emotional states and behavior inappropriate displays, and intellectually integrate them into more appropriate behaviors, because they do know at their essence elements of good, elements of appropriateness, elements, because they've observed, but they've done so at a nonverbal level. This is why you let them saddle with the burden of solving the emotional state. They'll not be good at it because they're not used to you communicating like this, let alone getting close to them and not screaming at them. See, screaming and beatings were necessary at a time when the environmental demands meant that if you walked outside and acted out, you could be lynched or killed. Within
You
this
still
context,
can. You still
yes,
can.
that's right. But they're more isolated events, not whole society events. We have it because we've still been segregated. We have elements in our homes of safety, and in with the context of safety and these act out behaviors, here's your chance to harmonize the brain in an environment that you control as an adult. And this is just another way to control it. This is what you can control in your household. You can control and integrate the brain to harmonize intellectually, meaning their emotional needs with their intellectual needs, which will help them be better performers in the world, better problem solvers in the world, better geniuses in the school, on the playground, on the football field, in the classroom, in the science fairs, all that.
Well, I can't thank you for your time. I think we're probably at like close to 2 hours. It is what it is, family. I could not stop this Daud GeAzan fire. Articles of ADOS. I didn't want to stop it. Dawood, as usual, I am expecting links on the other 11 of 12 processes and some more information for my viewers, please, on the multiple intelligence theory, any type of nuggets you can bless us with so we can get on the road or further down the road, shall I say, with our own healing and our own therapy within ourselves and within our families. We really are very invested here over at the Friends of ADOS TV in uplifting ADOS. And we're absolutely riding hard for each and every one of us to excel over the top in this country that has designed nothing but genocide for us since they brought us over here in chains. So please, I am looking forward to those links and I will share them all once the show concludes. Uh, did you have any final words? And I would love to hear you close with something, really wonderful and profound about why our children deserve the promise, what that promise is, and the importance of everyone getting involved.
Yes, I was born at a time, growing up in the 70s, with an understood mandate of adulthood. And that was told to me by my father and was echoed around, which was you are to do better for your children than you had yourself. And that didn't just mean material money wise, but just better. So that was a promise I just took for granted I was expected to do. And so that's what I did and tried to do. So that's why I titled this uh, Promise the Children Deserve, because they do deserve this. And this is something we can control within the context of our homes to improve their intelligence and give recognition to the natural genius they were born with. Their only limitation has been us. And then they have to deal with a more hostile world. Let's stop setting them up. Let's sacrifice in terms of activism what we can do on the outside when we are in the outside, participate in more political activism. ADOS is my chosen vehicle. There are other vehicles out there. Get them moving because it's the lives of your children that you're literally saving. And it's not just their lives, it's their future to have a life. So for you individually, love yourself because that Better makes you able to love your child and to make those sacrifices, even if it would mean your life, because they're worth it. And that's all I have to say.
Well, that was just simply beautiful. Ah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I can't wait until the next show I concoct just to have you on the lives with my amazing audience. I thank each and every one of you for joining this live. I thank you for sharing this live with everyone you know. I thank you for all the watch parties to help this message go viral. I thank you for your signatures. Remember, we need 100,000 on that COVID-19 relief for ADOS specifically. 100,000. This is the time in the movement that everybody gets a chance to move. Visit Triangle ADOS for that link if you don't see it on the Angela Nirvana thread. I just love y'all Black. I love y'all strong. Thank you. Lisa Todd said, our children are geniuses and it's being suppressed. We must break them out of this suppression. Paula Barnett gave Power Fist and she says, great show, family. And I echo your sentiment. I am just on fire to practice these things. Oh, Sean Allen Rector says, definitely informative. A great show, Ange. I thank you guys because I feel the same, family. I feel the same. I'm not going to cry. Y'all know I'm a crybaby. But this, I cannot wait to practice some of these great intellectual and emotional stimulants for my daughter's brain when she's acting out. I thank you for that clarification of what it's stemming from. And I promise to do better for myself and my daughter, as I'm sure you will too. With that, family, I've got to close this show because I have to do another live of the COVID stimulus letter and our proposal to the president. This is a White House petition. We need your signatures. Also, real quick, commercial for your producer of you and Lisa's Articles of ADOS podcast. Daud, could you say that before I pray us out?
That is Yafa Bey at the Spirit of Teperet. Please utilize her online mall.
Absolutely. And I will put that link at the conclusion of the show in this thread as well, family, so you can have access to that. And with that said, family, happy Mother's Day to the fathers that act as mothers in that dual capacity, to the women who are the mothers. Happy, happy Mother's Day. I hope that this helped in some way as a gift to your Mother's Day. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God surely is, because you are the face of God. You are the voice of God. You are the living body temple of the Spirit of the living God. Until next time, family, I love you Black. I love you strong. Mwah. Have a beautiful, God-inspired rest of your day and weekend. Take care, family. Thank you, Dawood. I'll be in touch.
Yes, ma'am.